Okay, so welcome to Web Dev Lesson 7. In the last few lessons, two back from Lesson 7, we talked about DOM manipulation. Last lesson was more of a whole mishmash of like interval time. So today we will be trying to tie this all together and then learn some new stuff. We did not get to the project last time, so I kind of want to start out with that. I believe you all should have a RICHCODE static open and you know how to add new folders and stuff. So you should be able to do this. Basically, make some kind of interface where the user can change the color of the text and background, and then make it so that when the user exits and reloads the page, the color is preserved. So maybe use just a tip, use an interval to keep setting local storage to whatever color currently on screen. And also, once you're done with that, you can try and use math.random to generate a random color. So, okay, so it will be 9 minutes from now, and then we will move on to some new stuff starting now. We have around 4 minutes left. Okay, there's around a minute left. Is there anything any of you want me to go over again, or like you don't understand? Because this project kind of encompasses a lot of the stuff we've been doing for the last few weeks. Okay, so that is around time. So today it's today it's mostly going to be about events. Events are actions that are triggered by user interactions, like clicks. Like if I click right now, you see the slideshow will advance. That's within the event listener. Key presses. So that would be like keyboard key presses. If I load up any web-based game, they're going to be using event listeners to take keyboard inputs, so like WASD, arrow keys, and even sometimes if you have a custom built like input box, instead of actually having an input box, they are going to be just listening for key presses and then displaying it on screen. And then for forms, we haven't really gotten to forms yet, but uh, basically what forms do, you can it's a few inputs and the submit button, and you can use JavaScript also to listen for changes, submits, and inputs on a form. and on window. So for window, you have to attach it to the actual like window global, basically load, resize, and scroll. So if I'm scrolling the mouse, if I'm resizing the screen, or I I just like loaded this website, or actually there's something called on unload, before on unload. So that is going to be triggering some function to run right before you close the tab. So uh if I go to something, I so if I make some editing, okay, never mind. I've that is not working right now. So let me think of something. Okay, anyways, it's just if you close a website and it gives you that pop-up that says uh changes aren't saved, are you sure you want to leave? You might lose information. That is before unload before unload event, and that's triggering because you're exiting the page. So in JavaScript, we can use event listeners to kind of listen in on events. What they do, just imagine them as like little ears. You can stick them onto elements, and when the element has an event that's being triggered, like if you're clicking on it, uh, which will trigger a click event, and there's an event listener on that event, it will hear the click and it will be able to run a function. So for example, this sample here, if we get, so pretend there's a button called clicker button, and instead of putting an on click as an attribute, we can add in a function using add event listener. So if we So if we select it and then add event listener, and that the event here is going to be click. So something is going to be triggered every time you click that element. And then the function that's going to be run is just function, then an alert, button clicked. So event listeners are good because you can keep the JavaScript separate from the HTML. So with an on-click, you actually just have the JavaScript actually inside the HTML. And because it's already in parentheses, it's going to be hard if you're going to be doing like anything with strings. You're going to have to be like switching around from single quotes to double quotes. Meanwhile, event listeners, you can just add them in JavaScript, and also it keeps your HTML really nice and tidy. Also, it allows multiple event handlers on the same element. So I can have a button that has four different functions that all run when I click on it. That is going to be a lot more messy if you do it with on-click as an attribute. And also you can dynamically attach and remove events. So there's also a element.remove event listener that you can use to take off an event. So for example, if I have a button and depending on what the value of an input field is, it has a different function. I can use an event listener on the input to detect when it changes, and then in that change, if if for example it's an input, I say like the number is higher than 100, then I remove all event listeners from the button and then add one in that takes the user to one page, and if it's less than 100, I take the user to another page. So that's kind of useful. And also, if you look up here, if you use Chrome, you know these are all extensions, right? So a lot of times, how these extensions work is they will be putting on event listeners in order to basically hear events. So For example, ad card, it blocks a bunch of ads. How it works is it detects stuff like page loads and iframes from different websites trying to load in using event listeners, and it's able to then remove them. So that it's not really checking like every second, oh, is there an ad here? Isn't there ad there? And then checking that every second because you'll still be able to see the ads for maybe half a second and going to take up a bit of compute space. So event listeners will actually make that a lot easier for the application where it's only being triggered when there's a change or when there's a load in the window. And also, for example, Grammarly, it can detect like inputs and text areas on different websites to correct grammar and point out like mistakes I might make while writing stuff. So that also uses event listeners in order to detect if I'm selecting anything. And also the good thing about event listeners, they can handle multiple handlers on the same element, so it does not interfere with the code of the original website, so that everything works as expected. It's just that added functionality. Okay, so keyboard events tend to be like really, really useful, and sometimes click events, but we'll get into that more with Canvas. Right now, click events, it's just on click with a button, which we had in the previous example. So keyboard events are really useful when developing any sort of unconventional input system or controls in the game. Or for example, Wordle, you don't really want the user to be typing in an input because that's kind of that does not look too good. Also, it's useful for some input formats where you want complete control over the user's typing. So for example, Google Docs, if I open a new doc here and I start typing some stuff, if I open inspect and go here, you'll see that this is actually a canvas, which is something that uh is just a uh giant block that JavaScript can draw on with like pens and it can add text and stuff. So what's happening here is this is actually not an input. Instead, they have a canvas here. And when I'm pressing down keys, there's an event listener that catches the key presses and is able to determine which key I'm pressing and what what it should be displaying. So this is also useful if I like, for example, if I do an ad or like mention something instead of having an input where it's kind of like dumb and you can't really do anything with it. With keyboard events, you can detect when you're pressing an at key, and then Google Docs will know, oh, you're trying to, so you want to like add somebody or at a location or date. So binding keyboard events, I like to always do it to the document for most like games and stuff because otherwise the user will have to be selecting a specific element, so they have to click on it in order to input. With keys, you have a ton of keys on your keyboard. You have the 26 letter keys, you have the 10 number keys, and you have a bunch of other like utility keys. And also you have caps lock and shift, so that will modify what you're typing even more. In order to access what key or what you're trying to type, you can pass in a parameter in this function. And when the browser runs this, it will pass in an argument that is basically an object with information about the event. So kind of like when this is being triggered, it's the function is being handed a pamphlet that says, oh, this event, which key is being pressed, when did it happen, a lot of stuff. Is the shift key pressed? Is the control sheet key pressed? So that you can make decisions off that. A really simple one that comes in useful a lot of the time is event.key. Basically, what it does is it just tells you which key is being typed, and it takes into account shift, control, so on, so that um you're at you're actually able to make something like a typed input really easily. So if I go here, so right now I'm not holding shift, right? So I type J, and then I get a bunch of events. J pressed, key down event when your key goes down, key up event when your key comes back up, about to be input. It's an input they're specific to basically if you have a text area or something. And it's more useful than key down or key up because you might have modifiers like control and stuff that you don't really want to be affecting your text box. Now, so I will hold shift and then press J now. So I'm typing capital J. So right now you see it sees the shift key has been pressed, and then now instead of a lowercase j, it sees an uppercase J being pressed. Now my keyboard, it does not have lowercase and an uppercase J button. They're the same button. It just depends on the shift key. So event.key will take that into account and give you the capital or not capital letter. And also this also applies for the top row too. So like two, it only sees two. If I press shift two, so that's an at sign, it, it will give you the at. So, and also you don't have to memorize any key data per se. It's literally just a character that you would type out. So like the key, and then for special keys like shift is just the name of the key with a capital letter. And when you don't know what the code is for something, you can just always go here, and I will send this in the chat. You will always be able to go here, go to this local simulation, and be able to find out by just pressing it. So if I put in enter, there's key down and key up event for enter. But then for input and about to be input, enter is not really a key that is affected, so it's gonna just return null, which is like nothing, basically. So the disadvantage of using key is that if you're making a game with controls or, for example, making Wordle, you don't really want, like, you're not trying to get the specific letter that the user is pressing. So they might be accidentally pressing shift. And so, like, they're instead of pressing two, event.key is actually returning the at sign, or four, it's actually returning the dollar sign. So to avoid that, you can use event.code. So code is going to be a bit different. So let's go here, also simulation. So again, if I press J, so the key is going to be lowercase j, the code is going to be just PJ, and this does take a bit of memorizing, or you can just go here and get the code. If I press Shift J, you notice the key changes, it goes to capital J, the code is exactly the same. So what code does, it basically takes all of the buttons on your keyboard and assigns a code for each one. and it does not care about if Control or Shift is pressed. It just cares about what key are you pressing. Also, with keyboard event key, it only gives you shift with code. You can actually determine if it's the left shift. So if you look on your keyboard, there's going to be a shift on the left and right. And if I press right shift, oh, sorry, that is going to be shift right. Uh, this is going to be useful, like for example, in Minecraft, if you have played Minecraft, your people shift with the left shift button, not the right shift button. So if you want an event to fire only when you press the left shift button, like you're crouching in Minecraft, then you can bind it using code. If you want something to happen, regardless of which shift is being pressed, or like even which alt, because there are also two alt keys on the keyboard, you can use code instead of key. So preventing default, if I'm selecting an input and I also have a event listener that handles that for me. So for example, I do not want it to be actually typed. I don't want the character actually to be typed into that input. And I don't want other applications to see this key down because like they might interpret it as something different. So what you can do in this case is do an event.prevent default. What that does, basically it's saying I am going to be handling this event, and then nobody else is going to know that this event happened. Only this event listener will be able to know. This is going to be useful in a case where you're putting in hotkeys for example, like if you're making a rich text document, you want Control B to be like you make it bold, but Control B will do something else. So then you use prevent default. So you like for example, if you have a key down and have an if statement that says if Control key is pressed and the key code is going to be key B, then prevent default and then do something to bold the text. So basically prevents others from handling it. And then some other keyboard event properties, event.repeat. So if I go to if I go back to the key one and then go down to the simulation, if I press J and keep holding it, so you'll see there's a ton of J's here, even though I'm just holding the key J down. So you'll see this is all alternating, about to be input, input, and then repeating, about to be input, input, and then repeating. What repeating is, it's basically going to tell you, like inside an event, if the key is being held down and if if you were like writing this in a regular text box, would the browser be interpreting this as you're trying to type this multiple times? And then there's control key, alt key, meta key, shift key. So inside an event, if you want to know if control key is being held down, so for example, back to the bold example I talked about a while back, you can use event.control key to determine if the control key is being pressed down at the current moment, so you don't have to keep track of it with a key down and key up event listener. Also goes for alt key, shift, meta key is going to be a bit more complicated. Meta, it's referring to the specific key that your OS provides that's specific to your OS. So for Windows, I'm on a Windows computer right now. there's a Windows key. So if I uh if I go to code here and if I press the Windows key, well, my Windows panel popped up. But anyways, it registers as a key is Meha and codes Meha left because it's kind of my Windows key on the left of my keyboard. On the Mac, I believe it I believe there are two command keys on the Mac. So it's going to register as Meha left and Meha right. And because command is specific to the MacBook, it's going to be registered as a Meha key. So this m- Meha key is not going to be really useful because it kind of will override the JavaScript. If I if I if I go here and click the Windows, my Windows panel still pops up. If I do Windows R, then the R doesn't even register. Windows basically just ignores JavaScript. All you can see is that yes, the Meta key has just been pressed. On Chromebooks, it's going to be something like the assistant key, and if you're on a phone, it's basically never going to register. Just like Control, Alt, and Shift. So, okay, now for phones, keyboard events, there's not really a way to make your phone pop up a keyboard for you to type in the same way as a computer, you have a physical keyboard that's always there. On phone, you would have to be providing the user with an actual text box that they can type in, and then the uh on on-screen keyboard will pop up. So keyboard events are kind of going to be useless on mobile. You're going to want to make an on-screen keyboard. Uh, so this is something I made a long time ago. This bottom panel is for mobile, where you can also just you can actually just click these. And if I were on a phone, I could also click them. But then I can also just use my keyboard by registering keyboard events to type these in. Oh yes, and this is what I'm talking about before. If you can see this, this leave site changes you made may not be saved. That is done with an on before onload. Okay, so now to tie this together with the last few lessons, we're going to be making a timer where you can use basically inputs, buttons, set a timer, and if you don't know where to start, just start by making the HTML for this, and then going into how do I make the timer run, and then how do I do the theme color. And if you want to, you can research this by yourself. How do you play a piece of audio in JavaScript? If you so like Google it, go on MDM web docs, and I'll be I'll be giving you around 10 minutes for this. We have around 20 minutes left in class. And I will also be running through this towards the end of the 10 minutes. So that will be starting around right now. Oh yes. Also, it's still do it on GitHub code spaces. You can like just add another folder and add a new HTML and JS and CSS fold files. into a new folder. Okay, so there's around 4 minutes left. I will be going over a solution of the timer that is actually here. Um, Let me just load up this code space and then start it. So first of all, if we go here, you see that color is going to be uh carried on. We can change the color, we can randomize it, set it to that, and then we can close and reload the page and it will still be there. We can set the timer and it will do as the timer does. So when time's up, it will give you an alert. So how this works is I put it all in one HTML file here. Basically for the input, it's type number and there's restrictions on it, so in and max. And then I just have buttons with on click binded to them for set time, start, pause, and reset. There's for the timer time, there's just a div. For the color theme, it's literally a color picker input along with a button. So in the JavaScript, there's a there's a little there's a little bit of math here and a bit of logic to make it into the format minutes, seconds, and then for the time left, you set it to local storage every time you update the display. So to actually do the timering of the timer, we have an interval that's set every 1,000 milliseconds, so every 1 second, and that's going to be decreasing the time left by one, and then updating display. So then that's going to be changing that to reflect what the actual time is and setting it to the local storage. Uh, Pause timer, you're basically uh clearing the interval, resetting the timer, you're basically clearing the interval and then resetting that's reflected up here. Uh, Theme color is kind of just so for this, there's I binded an input event to it that basically sets its value as the theme color by using document.body.style. And every time you set it, it's going to be put into the local storage. And then Windows onload. This will run every time you the Windows loaded. It's not really necessary to put this in an onload. I just wanted to show you this. It's a window event. So aside from using add event listener, you can also just do when some element dot on click or element dot on key down, but that's not as sophisticated as event listeners because you can only do one function at a time this way. However, it is useful for stuff like window.onload where you're basically just going to have one function here. So on load, it's, you can also just put it like at the end of the script here instead of in an onload. But this is going to be good practice because sometimes you have weird stuff that happens where the window will take a ton of time to load and then it won't like set the color. So notice how it starts out white and then goes to blue. basically gets the timer and gets the color from local storage and then puts it back into the background color and the display. And also as this kind this kind of was a bonus. So for keyboard event, basically just bind it to the document and then I'm using a key.2 lowercase here for simplicity. You can also just use code equals key at or key p or key r, and that will be able to. So if I set that and I click S on the keyboard, it starts it. If I click P, it pauses it. If I click R, it sets. So, and also you might notice the color takes has a little transition to it. We'll be getting into that soon. That's in CSS. It's a transition. Okay, so we have around 7 minutes left. I want to get through just a bit more stuff. So arrow functions are shorthand for functions. You'll notice that I actually used an arrow function here with the set interval. This does not look like a function, but it's basically just saying function. That's literally what it's doing. So again, instead of having a function before the parentheses, we put a little arrow that's constructed of an equal and a greater than sign between the curly braces and the parentheses. So this is going to be useful if you have something like very simple one-line function. So you want to add 2 to a number instead of having a whole function here called up to and then having it return a plus 2. You can just set it like you're setting a variable. So like let up to equals a uh a arrow a plus 2. So those are basically equivalent. This a on in the middle here, that is going to be the parameter that's being passed in. That a plus 2 on the right is going to be the what was it returning. So hmm, once we will be getting uh once we'll be doing fetch and stuff, this will be a lot quicker to write than writing out function and then having like the curly braces because it's just a one-line clause. You can put it inside parentheses and it's like really simple. So if I want to define a function, so um so like custom round to 1 digit. And so if I want to pass in just one variable, I'm going to be doing a variable name like number, and then to round it to 1 digit, I am going to be doing uh over 100 math round number times 100. Sorry. So round to 1 digit, 1.54. Oh, oh, sorry. And that is going to be 1.5, 1.55, that's going to be 1.6, so on. So instead of having a whole function statement, this will make it like really, really simple to define. However, if I'm doing something like round to round to the nth digit. If I'm doing two or more parameters or zero parameters, I'll need these parentheses again, which is kind of sad because I really do not like typing these out. So this just signifies that it's an arrow function that you're passing in literally no parameters, or you can do like number digit. So I'll do this 10 to the power of, we learned that in the math lesson, digit, so 10 to the power of digit. So basically how this round function works, it's multiplying the number by 10 to the power of the digit. So if I want to round it to two decimal places, it will bring it to 100 times whatever that is, and then round it so that everything else is cut off, and then divide it by 100 again to get the rounded value. So now I can run round, so like 5.142, and then that will give me 5.14. So there's going to be a bunch of like weird syntax things with arrow functions. Some people will write these just as a shorthand. So here I have an example where it's let hello say hello equals an arrow function. And instead of just returning something, if I put it in curly braces, it's going to be just a normal function again, except it's defined as an arrow function here. So console.log hello, and say hello should act like a normal function. And it gives me the console.log that says hello. And notice that here it's saying it does not return anything because once I add those curly braces in, I have to use the return keyword again. Okay, so that will be just around everything for today. Next week, I'll be going over some things that we'll be using arrow functions to tie those in. For now, you're free to go. Bye.